Hi, welcome to the CPC Speaks Podcast. We have a great guest here, Ira Hays with the Center for Wellness. He is an expert on working with children, mental health, and he's got an important topic that's so relevant to so many clinicians, and that's school phobia, right? Hopefully I'm using the right terms right off the bat, right?
You're right off the bat, Ken.
Okay, for once, okay. So why don't you tell us what are some of the key points? Well, you tell first of all, tell us about you, give us a little background.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ken. My name is Ira Hays. I am a licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey. I'm currently the director of Center for Wellness. I've been lucky enough to kind of work throughout the continuum of care here in New Jersey, from inpatient to having my private practice, and now kind of landed at Center for Wellness. I actually worked with Ken years ago at CPC and enjoyed a lot of the training and stuff that I got there. Right now, I've spent about 5 or 6 years of my life working school-based as a clinical coordinator at out of district placement, and spent a lot of time learning and studying, trying to figure out what works with school phobic kids. And I think one of the things that I think is most important, like when I first start doing I do a lot of trainings in districts and schools,
That's one of the
communities.
reasons, just to let the audience know, I picked you because I saw your training and it was fascinating. So yeah, tell us about school phobia.
Yeah, so I do a lot of trainings. One of the things that we first talk about is the difference between school refusal, school avoidance, and school phobia. Because I think if you Google it or you're talking to professionals, they often have like the same kind of language, but a little bit different. A lot of people will refer to it as school refusal. I specifically concentrate on school phobia. The difference being, um, I focus on the kids that are not coming to school due to a limbic response or that fight or flight response based just on school. So I kind of break it down into two or three different categories. The school avoidance are the kids that are having an anxious response, but not to school. So I kind of put things like attachment disorders and agoraphobia in that category. And then there's also the kids that I kind of categorize as having some school refusal, where it's more an opposition. I typically, a lot of the calls that I get for consultation and stuff, they come to me as like school refusal, but we do a little bit more digging, a little bit more case formulation, and then we come to find out that it's often school phobia that we're dealing with.
So let me see if I got it straight. So school avoidance, it sounds like you're saying originates more with a mental health condition and anxiety and something going on above and beyond. And then the school refusal is more of a behavioral thing. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, a lot of times school refusal is a more behavioral problem. The reason why I think it's important to differentiate these three things is like the outcome, that kid not being in school is the same, but the etiology and then the way we treat each one is a little bit different. So with school refusal, we'd be doing a lot more family work. I'd be advocating for like parent management training, possibly with the family. And then with school avoidance, some of the treatments similar, like with a child who's suffering from agoraphobia, that might be something that we do a similar exposure plan with. When we're working with school phobic kids, we often create an exposure plan, kind of work through it, their fear hierarchy. We could do that with agoraphobia, but if you try to expose a kid who's agoraphobic, who's not leaving the house, not going to the grocery store, not going to the mall, not doing anything, if we try to start with going to school, we're often setting that kid up for failure. So we typically address agoraphobia a little bit differently, meaning that we start with some in-home therapy or something that's based more outside of the house rather than at the school or in our program.
Start with where the person is. It's always good.
Exactly. We don't want them to be working on rung number 8 on the ladder when we haven't gone through like 1, 2, or 3, which would be,
Like you said.
as simple as like, can we get them out to 7-Eleven, or can we get them to the barber shop or something simple like that, as opposed to can we get them to sit at a school for 8 hours, is significantly more stimulating for an anxious kid.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So they said school avoidance, school refusal, and school phobia is the third one. So what's
School
the
phobia is the third one. So that's kind of where my specialty lies. And
tell
you
us
know
about
what? It's funny, Ken, because 5 or 6 years ago when I started working on this, no one really cared. There was like a small population of kids that I was working with at a therapy school that were suffering, and we were working with them pretty well. Then COVID happened, and a lot of kids were home for a year, 2 years, or even extended periods further than that. And they started building up this limbic response and this fear of just attending school or being around other people at school. So then that's when I started doing a lot more trainings, because the insights I gained years prior were helpful in trying to get kids back to school post-COVID. But I think,
Back to your question, you keep referencing limbic response. I think enough, it's a part of the brain. You want to elaborate on that? Like,
yeah, when I'm referring to the limbic response, I'm kind of the activation of that fight or flight response, that fight, flight, or freeze response in a kid that kind of like activates the fear and anxiety, which looks different for a lot of kids, which I think is often why people refer to it as school refusal. And one of the things that I talk about the most being misunderstood is a child's response to anxiety in the presence of attending school. So a lot of times a parent will go in, wake up their child and be like, it's time to go to school. And this child acts out with aggression, right? And they'll like throw something at their parent and be like, leave me alone. I'm not going to school. And the parent automatically, once we see aggression, it's automatically categorized as they're just refusing to go to school. And a big part of what I do is go in and kind of reevaluate and kind of educate people that, part of it's called fight, flight, or freeze. Like fight response is part of that response. And like oftentimes, if we can help them reduce anxiety and reduce that limbic response, we can often reduce that flight response and hopefully get that kid to school.
that makes a lot of sense. So how to do that? Let's use that example you gave us. We have the kid who's having some kind of anxiety reaction, but it's coming out as an anger in the morning, or some kind of acting out. At least it appears to be. What do you do? You're working with a family. What do you tell them to do?
Well, some of it starts with just some basic, skills training. So making sure that they have the skills to manage um, their emotional regulation. So making sure that they understand their breath, their body, what's going on. Um, Beyond that, we traditionally with like exposure response prevention, we don't do a lot of skills training. We just do the exposure plan. In my experience with school phobic kids, it does help to kind of assist them with learning some skills to manage that emotion. Because during exposures, a lot of times the goal is not to eliminate the anxiety. The goal is to kind of normalize the anxiety a little bit. So I think one of the issues that happens is that we seek comfort too frequently, and then we can't handle a little bit of discomfort. So with the idea of the exposure plan, what we would typically do is teach the kids a little bit of skills, a little bit of CBT, help them understand exactly what's going on and the relationship between their thoughts and their feelings and their inability to go to school. But then also create simultaneously help them build a fear hierarchy so that we understand what it looks like of small steps that they can be exposed to that allows them to make incremental progress towards the big picture of attending school for a full day. So
I,
oftentimes it might start not even at school, it might start at home on a Zoom call. One of the things that we learned is that Zoom and Google Meet and all these things are great for being able to do exposure work without actually getting
right.
to the school. So we can kind of enter the home as a first step.
And just to go back, I liked what you had said about that kind of accepting the anxiety. It's almost an unrealistic, especially in today's world, to think, oh, we're going to make you anxiety free. I think everybody, you get anxiety about going to work. That's like a life thing. So almost teaching them to tolerate and manage rather than have the unrealistic expectation. Oh, you're going to be fine. You're never going to be anxious again. So, how about the exposure therapy? Like, how did you said you have the tools to do that with Zoom and things like that? How like walk us through how that works? Like, let's say somebody wanted to enroll their kid in exposure therapy.
Yeah, I mean, at Center for Wellness, we don't do like traditional full ERP programming, but what we are sensitive to is like how exposure work integrates into working with the kids. So, for example, let's say we have a kid that's, in the schools and programs, everybody have kind of coped with this over the last few years, but the idea of a kid who's not even willing to do what we're doing right now, struggling to be on camera in a virtual session with either a therapist or class. Exposure work would look at like building a fear hierarchy of how to get that kid back into a class. And that might start with a plan that's number one on the list or the fear hierarchy might be, just being on voice or with the camera on but not on screen or, just showing the top of their head. Not as like a long-term fix to it, but as like a progressive goal is to
Get them
I would
on.
show I'll be off screen, I'll be partially on screen, I'll be on screen, and then maybe I'll be in person. Now, if the kid's already kind of attending school, a lot of times what we'll advocate for is, learning the skills with us, doing some exposure work with the program, but then going to school and doing maybe exposure work for like one place in the school. So there's a couple different things that we expose for. We expose for different people, different places, different stimulus, duration. So when we're trying to work a kid back in school, we might start with that kid in a counselor's office. So we're exposing to one person in one place. And then we'll expand from there based on what that kid is dealing with. And typically, in my work, I find that kids either fall into one of three categories. They're more performance-based anxiety with their school phobia. They're kind of social-based anxiety with their school phobia, or some kids, have a combination of both. So that fear hierarchy would help address each one of those rungs on the ladder until we get to the kid feeling, more comfortable. Again, not an absence of anxiety, but more comfortable, a tolerable amount of discomfort when they're sitting in school all day.
Very good. It's a very systematic approach. So to wrap it up, do you have, not to put you on the spot, we didn't rehearse this part or any of it really, but what do you have, like, without divulging any personal information, could you explain maybe a successful case, or how you maybe put a few together? How would it look? Give us like an overview. I know at CPC, you probably get a lot of referrals from us. We mobile response, we go out to kids' homes for school refusal all the time. We treat as much as we can in-house, but so let's say you got a kid and that's the situation, fictitious, semi non-fictitious example of how this all works, and let's wrap it up there.
Yeah, well, I think probably a pretty good example is when, just a few years ago, I was consulting with a school district. So I went into the school district and worked with them. So even if it wasn't in the home, if it's in a program or, CPC or Center for Wellness, um, we were able to create a program in which the kids came in prior to school starting and do like a small, brief exposure plan where they were exposed to a therapist, exposed to a small group of kids that were like-minded, exposed to, let's say, one or two periods of class, and then exposed to like incrementally more during a day. So I think it sounds very simple, right? Like it sounds like we're solving this really complex mental health problem with, just some simple exposure work. And I hate to say it, but it is kind of often that simple. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works with the majority of kids. And I think the reason why it's hard for people to not understand, but to comprehend this is that we have this like thought process in which we see treatment has to be this weekly, long-term event that we go for an hour a week. And with exposure treatment, especially with the idea of school phobia, it's also often labor intensive right at the beginning, right? We might spend a week or two spending a significant amount of time or incremental more time with a client, but then we solve the problem and then we don't have to necessarily revisit that as frequently. So there's many kids that I've worked with for 2 weeks, went through an exposure plan with them, they go to school, and then we don't see, do they have anxiety still? Yes. But we don't see them in terms of like that school phobic response anymore. Right. Exactly.
There you go. All right. It's interesting. You have a gift for presenting it in a very like understandable way. No, really, I if you get it out there and do a training, I'd definitely advise people to go catch the full training. But I think this was a nice
yeah, I appreciate it. And just anybody who's watching, if you're interested in the training, it's free. So if you contact Center for Wellness and ask for school phobic training, if you are a school district that's local in New Jersey, it's free to any district that wants it. So they can call and set it up.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. A fellow CPC alumni helping me out with my podcast here. So
I appreciate you having me.
Thanks. Appreciate it very much. All right.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it. Take care.